Hello everyone and welcome back to Football Manager 2019 and the third and probably final part of this experiment where we're taking a look at what would happen if Newcastle had a billionaire owner. We have put in charge of the club Sheikh Khalid bin Zayed Al Nahyan. He's been in charge now, we're in the year 2030, so about 12 years in charge of the club, replacing Mike Ashley and doing what looks like a decent amount of good at the club. You can see they've got Simone Inzaghi in charge of the club. Stephen Naismith is the assistant manager with Daniel Sturridge, head of youth development. Steve Harper, the goalkeeping coach. That just took my attention away there for some reason. But they've built a pretty decent squad together, all things being considered. You can see here we've got De Ligt in there, Theo Morton. These are good young players at the club, but it is a reasonably small squad and it's not got as much value in it as the one we looked at about 5 years ago. But there has been a huge amount of money spent on players over recent seasons. We're looking at billions of pounds being spent over the last 10-15 years. They have recouped a lot back in sales. You can see in this one season they took in over £500 million in player sales. But they did spend more than that on new players coming in. So there's been a lot of overturning at the club. Somebody did mention that we should have upped the reputation. The reputation's already pretty high for a club in this position. And you have to remember that Man City's status didn't jump that much for a few years after their owner came in. And I think that's probably a similar story here. But they're a decent club. They're climbing up the table. When we look at their overview, you can see they've been trotting around in about 8th, down to 10th, and now in 7th. Finished 6th in the most recent season, and we're just looking to see if they can finally crack the top 4 and hopefully win a Premier League. Now today what we're going to do is go kind of 10, 15, 20 years, I'm not sure how far. I'll just go ahead and keep an eye on what's going on in the club, and then we'll just run through their seasons, see what trophies they've won, where they finished in the league, what players they've signed, what the club looks like, and if the Sheikh is still in charge of the club. But if you are enjoying this experiment, make sure to hit that like button. There'll be a new experiment out in a couple of days' time, so make sure you subscribe for that when it does arrive, and let me know in the comments if you have ideas for experiments down below. But let's jump ahead now into the future and see how Newcastle have got on. Well, we are now in the future. We've gone quite far in the future. It's the year 2065 at this point. So we're 35 years ahead of where we left off last time. This is what the league table looked like last time we had a look. We're going to fly through this pretty quickly, given how far into the future we've gone. You can see here in the year 2031, you can see that they had a run in the Europa League campaign, did well in the group stage, getting a good few wins, 2 draws in there, but unbeaten across it. They also did well in the Carabao Cup, getting through to the semi-finals of that competition, not facing any big teams along the way, and in the semi-final a 2-0 win over Watford in the first leg, followed by a 3-1 defeat, which they then won on penalties to put themselves in the final, looking for another Carabao Cup. They're out of the FA Cup, league not doing too badly, managed to beat Rapid Vienna to get through to the next stage of the Europa League, but they were beaten 3-0 by Arsenal, which is a bit of a nightmare for them. A big defeat, 2-0 down at half-time, finished off early in the second half, not that much of a competition, and then beaten 2-1 by Valencia in the first leg there. They did manage to equalise, but it wasn't enough. But then they did win 1-0 and go through on away goals to the quarterfinals. Their league campaign, nothing spectacular. Sevilla at the quarterfinal stage in a 2-2 draw with 10 men away from home. They're actually a 2-0 up with 10 men as well before 2 late goals from Sevilla brought it level. But then they did do the job at home, 2-0. Diego Jota and Christian Pulisic, putting them into the semi-final of the Europa League, a tournament they haven't won in its current format. They were beaten 2-0 though, again a man sent off in a big game, and then 2 second half goals, completely sinking them in the first leg against Inter, and they were also beaten 2-1 at home, so roundly beaten in the Europa League, not doing anything spectacular there, and their league campaign pretty poor. Well, actually not that bad. They're only 6 points off the Champions League in the end, but they did finish down in 8th place, which isn't exactly where they want to be. Now the next year, I'll run through this quite quickly. No Europa League action. You can see they did all right in the Carabao Cup, getting knocked out by Chelsea in the quarterfinals. FA Cup campaign going quite strong as well. Managed to get past Leicester on penalties, 3-0 on penalties. But then beaten by Chelsea again at the semi-final stage at Wembley this time. So no real success there. And you can see that they finished in 9th place in the league as well, even further off the top 4 that time around. The following season... pretty much nothing going on in this season. Knocked out the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup very early on. Not worth spending a lot of time on that. Although they did finish in 5th place, 2 points off Huddersfield in the Champions League places. How long have Huddersfield... Huddersfield finished 17th and then the next season finished 4th. What on earth happened there? We've had all this time with Newcastle not making it into the Champions League, and Huddersfield have a turnaround like that. Watford in 6th, Spurs in 7th, Arsenal in 9th, and United in 10th. Horrific seasons for some of those teams. It was a pretty boring and not that great league season for them either. Have we definitely got the right league season there? We have. I don't know how they hit 67 points. That does not look that impressive to me. But the following season, back in the Europa League, good, a lot of green here, doing well in the Europa League, getting a good few wins, still going in the Carabao Cup, beat Huddersfield in the quarterfinal there to put themselves in the semi-finals. They did manage to draw with Brighton in the first leg 2-2, a couple of late goals helping them out there, and then 3-0 away from home, putting them into another Carabao Cup final. Drew with Porto away from home in the first leg, and then beat them 1-0 at home to get through there. They were beaten by Chelsea again, though this time in the Carabao Cup final. 2-0 defeat, not brilliant for them. We're also beaten by Liverpool in the FA Cup. Managed to draw away from home with Lyon and win at home, so got into another Europa League quarter-final where they beat Sporting Lisbon 4-1 at home and lost 3-2 away, but still into the semis where they had to play Borussia Dortmund, a 3-2 defeat at home. They went 3-0 down but managed to salvage a couple of goals through De Ligt and Morton, and then a 1-1 draw away from home. Even another goal there wouldn't have been enough. They needed 2 more, so out at the semi-final stage 2 years in a row. And the following season, they did finally make it into the Champions League, finishing in 4th place. Huddersfield dropping down to 13th again. But they did pip Arsenal, Tottenham and Manchester United to the last Champions League space. So we're going to see Newcastle in the Champions League for the first time. Good progress on that front. And you can see straight into the group stage as well. Beaten Atalanta 3-0 in their first game. Beat Spurs in the Carabao Cup as well, but lost to Bayern Munich away from home. Not a surprise there. Lost to Madrid at home, which is not helpful. 10 men. Not helping them. Beaten by Atletico Madrid away from home. Did beat Atalanta again, and then Bayern 1-0 at home. So unless Bayern slipped up, they're probably in the Europa League knockout stages. Kept going in the FA Cup as well, and they were indeed in the Europa League knockout stages again, but crushed Ajax 6-1 on aggregate. Beat Bordeaux 6-1 on aggregate as well into the quarterfinals. Beat Gijon 3-0. 6-1 on aggregate, 3 rounds in a row into the semi-finals, and a 2-1 defeat by Arsenal. So they're not going to match that scoreline. But they did win 3-1 at home. After going 1-0 down, it must have looked all over for them. But then they got 3 goals in 15 minutes in the second half to make sure they did make it into the Europa League final for the first time, I think, where they were beaten 3-1 by Sevilla. So again, disappointment for the club on the European stage, not able to take that final hurdle, and they have lost an awful lot of finals across this game. They're just falling down and choking late on. But they have qualified for the Champions League yet again, 2 points clear over Arsenal. This is a pretty good time for the club here. And again, in the Champions League, beat Roma, beat Espanyol, beat Porto. Oh, that's a favourable group for them. Beat Porto again, drew Porto, beat Roma again, and beat Espanyol again. So into the Champions League knockout stages for the first time. Beaten by West Ham in the Carabao Cup on penalties. Brentford in the league, 4 defeats in a row there. That's a really poor run of form heading into a Champions League knockout stage game against Barcelona, where they went 1-0 down. When Barcelona had a man sent off, They then went 2-0 down, got a man sent off themselves, and went 3-0 down. And I'm not sure they're going to turn that around in the second leg. It'd be a great comeback if they did. They did manage to get a 1-1 draw at St James's Park, a sold-out performance, but not enough for them in the Champions League. But again, they finished fourth. They were only 8 points off the title as well. 1 point away from second place. Not a bad campaign. I don't know where Watford have come from. A few random elements popping into the save this far forward. But Champions League football for another year. Doing quite well. Difficult group with Atletico Madrid in there, but they managed to do alright against Benfica and Hoffenheim. I think they will have got through there. Cup run in the FA Cup, did make it to the knockout stage of the Champions League, but instead of Barcelona, they had Real Madrid this time. They did go 2-0 up against them in the first 14 minutes. St James's Park must have been rocking. Not a sellout either. I think that's the away fans not showing up. But 3 goals for Real Madrid turned that one around. And in the away game, they were beaten 4-1, absolutely hammered by Real Madrid there. Still going in the FA Cup though, through to the semi-final where they beat Stoke, a pretty easy run. Can they win another major competition? They can, a 2-0 win over Manchester City in front of nearly 100,000 fans in Wembley. Wembley's had an extension. Absolutely fantastic, winning their first piece of silverware for quite some time. And in the league, they unfortunately dropped down to 7th. A big drop there and a long way off the Champions League place. Is not a big step forward, but the silverware will bring them some comfort at the end of that season. So no Champions League. They're into the Europa League because of their FA Cup win. Did win the Community Shield for the first time, 2-1 over Liverpool. Good result there. And their league start, absolutely spectacular. Look at this. A few draws early on, but doing pretty well. Going through in every competition. 2-0 against Liverpool in the Carabao Cup semi-final. Beat them in the return game at Anfield as well, 2-1. This is an incredibly encouraging start to a season. Through in the FA Cup. Lost to Bordeaux in the Europa League first leg, but won 4-1 in the return game at St James's Park. Lost to Watford in front of 100,000 at Wembley, which is a little bit disappointing, but still going in the FA Cup. Beat Fenerbahce 6-0, beat Everton in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, beat Manchester United in extra time before they had a man sent off as well. They were 2-1 up, and then in the quarterfinals 1-1 with Bayern Leverkusen, and then 2-2 at home means they were knocked out by a 90th minute goal from Bayer Leverkusen, and did win the FA Cup 3-0, retaining that for the second year in a row. And you can see they just missed out on Champions League football, 2 points off. Now I'm going to speed up running through this at this point. Lost the Community Shield, and if we just run down to the latter points here, you can see they're beaten in the Carabao Cup as well. Doing alright in the Europa League, got past Benfica. Also got past Valencia in the quarterfinals, but lost to Bayer Leverkusen in the semi-finals. That's disappointing. And in the league that year, they finished in second place, but 14 points off the top. That's a big gap from the league leaders, but it looks like they're just potentially on the precipice of becoming a real force in English football. So we'll keep an eye on this. Good start to the league campaign. Back in the Champions League, beaten by Barcelona 2-1. But doing alright generally in that group. Did manage to get out of it, I think, despite 2 defeats to Barcelona. League form doing pretty well, especially in January there. And beat PSG 2-1 at home. 10 men, they could have done better there. Disappointing to concede a goal and go 1 down. And then beating 2-0 in Paris. They held out to the 81st minute and then caved late on. So knocked out there, beaten by Southampton in the FA Cup, so they don't retain that for another year. But have they done better in the league? Nope. Dropped down to 4th, but only 5 points off the title. That's a real opportunity for them, and they just couldn't find those 2 extra wins that they needed to take the Premier League title. Now the Champions League group stage though, that one's looked pretty encouraging. And you can see they beat Real Madrid 3-2 at St James's Park, despite going 1-0 down in the first minute. An 80th minute winner from Cesare at home. Can they repeat it away from home? They can. A 1-1 draw. Again, an early goal conceded, but that goal from Arthur Cullen gets them through to the Champions League quarterfinals for the first time in the club's history. They've drawn 0-0 away against Bayern Munich, a good result there, but a 1-0 defeat at home, a 78th minute goal for Bayern Munich, sank their chances and so no Champions League glory. And they finished runner-up in the Premier League again, 7 points off the title. They are definitely knocking on the door now. Another Champions League campaign which seemed to go pretty well. Their coefficient would be quite high now. I imagine they'd be a second seed in the Champions League, but being 3-0 by Bayern Munich at home, they're never going to recover from that. And despite the draw, knocked out in that competition at the first hurdle. And a good way off the title there. Liverpool back to form, 14 points clear. But more Champions League football for Newcastle, which is always nice. And what a start to the season that is. They didn't lose a game till mid-November. Spectacular. And that was to Cardiff. Spectacular stuff, though, in the Champions League. Beating Bayern as well. Was that home and away wins over Bayern? No, they lost at home to Bayern, but still going in the Carabao Cup. Managed to get knocked out by Man United at the semi-final stage, but a 0-0 draw with Sevilla away from home in the first leg. In the return leg, they won 3-0 at home. Cesare with a late goal there. Through to the semi-finals of the FA Cup as well, where they beat Sunderland 2-0. 4-0 defeat to Real Madrid, though, away from home in the Champions League quarterfinals, and a 3-1 defeat at home, comprehensively dumped out of that competition, and then beaten in the FA Cup final for good measure. So not brilliant that. You can see finished second again, 15 points off a dominant Liverpool, which is a little bit unfortunate. You're just going to run right down to the bottom of these now and try and look out for any big competition results. You can see they were knocked out of the Champions League by Real Madrid, their absolute bogey team in the Champions League. Many teams' bogey team, to be fair. Did make it to another FA Cup final, but lost on penalties to Manchester City. Their league campaign looked pretty solid, though, from what I could tell. But they finished in 5th place. It tells how well I can read this. I mean, they've got a similar points total most years, to be fair. It's all about where the other teams kind of place around them. But 16 points off the top. They're just slipping behind Liverpool's pace in quite a big way. Europa League football this time around, not as interesting. Did make it to the semi-finals and beat Monaco there. So they knocked out Man City, Bayer Leverkusen and Monaco comprehensively 4-1. And then made it to the final where they beat Spurs 1-0. Pat Durnan. Imagine a man called Pat winning the Europa League for Newcastle. That is a spectacular result for them. Another trophy in the cabinet. And the Sheikh is seeing a return on his investment. Maybe not the scale he would have liked. I'm sure he would have liked a Premier League title, a Champions League title. But that's not how it's panned out. And in the league that year, they finished 6th due to all their cup competitions. Only 3 points off the Champions League, though. And the Europa League win means they're into the Champions League anyway. They were beaten 2-0 by Liverpool, who've won another Champions League in the European Super Cup. But Champions League group stage football going pretty well for them. I think they would have got through there. Knocked out by United in the Carabao Cup. Beat by Leverkusen 3-2 in the first knockout match. And 3-0 away means another Champions League quarter-final for them. Knocked out by Liverpool in the semi-final of the FA Cup. Beaten 2-1 by Bayern at home as well. And 1-0 away. So no Champions League semi-final. A good Premier League season, though, I think. And they finished second again. 8 points off the top. So just cannot get that final push. Beaten by Liverpool in the Community Shield. Interesting little run in the Champions League there in the group stage. But beaten 3-1 at home by Atletico and 2-0 away. So that's gone absolutely nowhere for them. And you can see 99-point finish from Liverpool. And just missed out on goal difference from the Champions League. So Europa League football yet again for them. I'm really trying to run through this quickly now. You can see they beat Porto and then were knocked out by Watford in the Europa League. Watford seem to have really stepped up a gear in the game and they finished in 8th that season. So definitely falling back at the 47-48 season mark. No European football. Carabao Cup win though. No, beaten in the final by Arsenal 1-0. I really thought I said David Nugent then, and I was like, how is he still going in 2048-49? But a good league season. I think they got back in Europe that year. Nope, they finished 8th again. I really can't read those results and translate it to the league table. There's not a lot going on now. I think they started to slip up a little bit. FA Cup final defeat on penalties to Man City. We've seen that, I think, 3 or 4 times now. And again, down in 8th place, not making it into Europe for another year. Knocked out by Watford in the Carabao Cup final. We're seeing repeat names pop up here in the domestic competitions as well. Watford taking the Champions League place with Newcastle in 8th again. They seem to love that position. Nothing in the cup competitions there, and a pretty poor league campaign. I think they've probably dropped down a bit. No, still in 8th, and only 3 points off the Champions League, so pretty low total for the Champions League, that, but there you go. Again, nothing happening, beaten in the semi-final stage. They've really just regressed as a team at this point. They have moved up to 7th, but 10 points off the pace, and somehow made it into the Europa League, finishing 7th. That's a bit of a lucky stroke for them. Not sure that campaign's gone brilliantly. They got a lot of wins in the group stage, to be fair. Beat Anderlecht 5-1 in the knockout rounds. Beat Dijon 5-0 in the second knockout round. And then Watford, becoming their domestic nemesis, knocks them out at the quarter-final stage. 1-0. Colin Davidson with the goal. Not what you want. I think I've accidentally just gone too far ahead. There we go. And you can see in the league, finishing down in 12th. Really falling back at this point from 7th to 12th. And the league campaign absolutely dreadful for another year. So they finished in 13th. They're flirting with relegation at this point. I mean, they were 16 points clear, but 45 points could put you in a relegation scrap. Bit better the next year, but they're not competing for the cup competitions anymore. Down in 11th. I think it really has fallen apart. I'm going to be interested to see if they've lost their owner at this point, because it does seem like that is a likely outcome here. Although they jump back up to 8th, but still a good way off the pace. I'm just going to have a quick look now at the cup competitions. They did make another FA Cup final, but Man City beat them again. The next year, Carabao Cup, beaten at the semi-final stage by Man City. Nothing in that one. Nothing in that one. Again, nothing in that one, and a lot of defeats. That looked like a relegation threatened season. Beaten by Arsenal in the FA Cup final. And we're nearly up to date now. Nothing again. And beaten by Man City in an FA Cup final. I mean, that's happened like 7 times. But just run through their league positions. 9th. You can pause at any point if you want to look at this in more detail. This is a season I thought they were relegation threatened. Down in 15th. Again, 42 points. Just getting over that 40-point mark. Then jumped up to 11th, 9th, down in 14th, just 38 points that year. But the point of cut-off, I mean, it's jumped up to 38 points this time as they moved up to 8th in the league table again. And then 14th, it's just really poor. And then jumping up to 8th, they're bouncing all around the range of mid-table there. But a pretty disappointing time for the club, really. I mean, they've not done an awful lot in their time. They've got a fantastic reputation as a club. But they just don't seem to have kicked up from this point where they finished second about 3 times. Were winning a few cup competitions, but they've just been bouncing around mid-table with not an awful lot going on. If we look at their transfer history really quickly, most of these are going to be regens at this point, so we aren't going to spend long looking at this. Instead, just look at these totals at the bottom where the transfer outlay, pretty net positive here. Huge amounts of money going out of the club. You're looking at hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, billions of pounds being spent by the chairman trying to get these results, and just showing you that money does not buy you titles anymore. It can buy you the kind of middling competitions, FA Cups, Europa Leagues, but it just isn't enough on its own for a Champions League or Premier League title these days. You have to be very lucky. I mean, look at all those players going out. I mean, a lot of them on loan. But the money's still rolling out here, even into the 50s. Money's still going, and then it's swung the other way. Early 50s, it's become a net negative at the club, possibly dealing with a debt situation. It's hard to know. But the money just kind of dried up a little bit here. But because of the size of the club, the reputation the club has, the money kept going out of the club. Now, if we just drop down to where we left off before, you can see they started to fail financial fair play, which will not have helped them. That really would have limited their ability to sign great players. And you can see this is where a takeover came in. 2039 is when a tycoon came in. So to be fair, a tycoon, he failed in his bid. And then 1 year later, he sold it to a consortium in 2040. But in the 40s, they had a decent run, especially the early 40s. So there must still have been money being pumped into the club. That's when they won the Europa League, a lot of runners-up positions in the FA Cups. News consortium came in the 50s when the owner was kind of scaling back any money being put into the club. And you can see it's not really carried on since then. Looking at their... if we look at their overall picture, you can see 4 Premier League titles. They never added to that. They did add a few FA Cups and a Europa League, but generally they've not added many competitions to the role here. And you can see in the FA Cup especially, look at all these runner-up positions. Oh, sorry, that was Premier League. Here, all these runner-up positions in the FA Cup. They did manage to add 2 FA Cups, but they also lost 7 finals, I think 5 of them to Manchester City. Runner-up in the European Super Cup, their first appearance in that competition. They did win the Europa League, they also lost one as well. And the Carabao Cup, they managed to add a couple of those, but they also lost 4 of those finals in that run as well. So it's been a really difficult time for the club, and you can see the valuations of the players still pretty good actually, sort of 20 to 50 million on most players. A few players a bit further down, not worth as much. Not worth looking at many of these players in great detail. He was a player signed by Feyenoord, decent record there, because these are all regens. But you can see it's just not a brilliant team anymore, and that's the trouble. So that is what would happen if a billionaire took over Newcastle United. I'm not going to spend much more time dragging this out. That is kind of all there is to see. We've run this experiment twice now. One time they just got relegated to the Championship about 15 times. The other time they did manage to win a few bits of silverware, which most Newcastle fans would like to see. They managed to finish runner-up in the Premier League a couple of times, got to the Champions League quarter-finals a couple of times, but couldn't break past those walls. And that is it for this experiment. Do drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed it though. Make sure to subscribe, and until next time, see ya.